Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you, and welcome tonight. Thank you for coming to our Connected Conversations, where we're partnering with the Snohomish Education Foundation to bring topics that are relevant and helpful in our educational lives. But welcome tonight. Thank you for joining us, and it's important community conversation. We're pleased to welcome Katherine Martinko, author of Childhood Unplugged, Practical Advice to Get Kids Off Screens and Find Balance. Katherine is a writer, editor, and an advocate who focuses on parenting, sustainability, and how the impact of technology is on on children. Her work challenges to think critically about how digital media shapes our kids' development and family life. Her message aligns closely with our district's direction. As many of you know, we have policies in place to limit cell phone use in schools, and we want to promote healthier, more focused learning environments. Like Katherine, we're committed to supporting students and building the meaningful, real-world connections that foster both academic and personal growth. Katherine comes to us from north of the border and earned her degree from the University of Toronto. Additionally, she speaks 4 different languages. I asked her to speak in English tonight, so we're all there. And is classically trained violinist. Wow, Katherine. She lives with her husband and her 3 children near Lake Huron in southwestern Ontario. Please join me in welcoming Katherine Martinko.
Good evening, everyone. I'm just going to switch mics here. So as mentioned, I am Canadian. I think I'm competing with some other Canadians for many people's attention tonight. So I'll try to keep this as interesting, make it worth your while. But thank you for taking the time to join me this evening. I made the trip from Port Elgin, Ontario, which is a small town right on Lake Huron, about 4 hours north of Detroit, if you were to drive straight up the coast of the lake. And I brought my son, my 16-year-old son, Alex, came with me, seated over here, and we climbed Mount Pilchuck yesterday, which was a lot of fun. I think it was the mountainiest mountain I've ever climbed before. My calves are a little sore. Anyways, I'm here tonight to talk about a question that is preoccupying many of us, whether we are parents, grandparents, teachers, school administrators. And so I'm the author of a book called Childhood Unplugged, Practical Advice to Get Kids Off Screens and Find Balance. It came out 2 years ago, and then last year, after Jonathan Haidt's best-selling book hit, The Anxious Generation, he reached out and he asked if I would join his campaign team. As he explained to me, he wasn't really expecting this topic to explode the way that it did in the public discussion. And so he had to spread out his team and invite other people to join, and that is why I am traveling across Canada and the US, giving talks like this on a regular basis to audiences like yourselves who are wanting to learn more about the effects of screen time and what we can do about it in our own lives. And I am also a columnist for the Globe and Mail newspaper, Canada's largest newspaper. I write a once-a-month column on parenting, how to manage technology, and also just how to introduce more independence and resilience in kids, sort of how to be more of a free-range parent, if you will, which I think of as the flip side to pulling back on the tech use. I also have a Substack newsletter called The Analog Family, which I encourage you to sign up for. It's free, and I write 1 or 2 articles every single week on this topic, and then I do regular appearances on TV shows, podcasts, radio stations around the continent. So this topic I've been deeply interested in professionally for many years, but it is also deeply personal. I am a mother. I have 3 sons. They are 16, 13, and 10, so my life is very chaotic, full of life and very wonderful. I call it the beautiful chaos. But I like to tell people that I understand what you're dealing with. I'm not looking at this just through a research lens or a journalist's eyes. I am living this on a daily basis with kids in elementary, middle, and high school, dealing with all the same questions about FOMO and when can I get a phone, and my friends are all doing this, why can't I? So I'm with you, right in the thick of it. So how did I get started on this path? Well, I grew up in the forest, deep in the woods in Ontario. I was homeschooled for a number of years. I grew up without a TV and without any internet. My parents still do not have internet in their home, which is a little bit inconvenient sometimes when I want to work from their house, but it might be strategic on their part, I'm not sure. But my memories of childhood are wonderful, of years spent playing outside with my siblings. And when we weren't outside, we were inside, making up wonderful games, cooking, dressing up, playing board games, reading lots of books. My husband, on the other hand, grew up in suburban Toronto, and he spent his childhood playing video games and watching TV. And when we compared notes, he felt that he had missed out on childhood. And so we opted not to start down that path with our own 3 kids, recognizing that it is a lot easier to just avoid introducing this technology than to claw it back after it's already become a part of a child's lifestyle. So my goals for tonight are to spend the first part of the talk going over many of the risks associated with excessive screen time, and I'll warn you in advance that this can feel a bit dark at times. There's a lot of alarming statistics. I talk about the various platforms that you will be familiar with and that maybe some of your kids are using, and it might not feel that great to learn about much of the things that they're being exposed to. But then the talk will turn, and it will take on a more positive note, and I will share with you all of the really practical, concrete, clear things that you can do right now as the guardians of these children in your lives to improve their relationships with technology. So I want you to leave here tonight feeling empowered. That is my goal. All right, I would like to start by telling you a quick story. A number of years ago, I met a woman who had just immigrated to Canada. And she had a baby that was about the same age as my youngest son was at the time, so they were about a year old. And the woman and I were sitting together in a doctor's waiting room. And the woman's baby was always incredibly calm, very quiet, just placid, almost bizarrely placid, to be honest. And I commented on this to the woman because my son was the opposite. He was absolutely crazy and made it his life's mission to evade sleep constantly. And I asked the woman about her baby being so calm, and she said, "Oh, well, I drug her to make her calm." And I said, "What?" And she said, "Yeah, I have this syrup that I brought from my home country, and I add it to the baby's bottle, mix it in, and the baby's perfectly sedated, perfectly calm." She said, "You should try it. It might make your life a bit easier." And then she said that she was planning to ask the family doctor for a refill that day because her supply was running low. I said, "The doctor will not give that to you. We just don't do that here in Canada. We do not sedate perfectly healthy children to make them easier to manage." Well, she was annoyed with me, and she said, "Oh, really?" And then she looked around the waiting room, she gestured all around us, and pointed out that all of the kids in the waiting room were sitting perfectly still, perfectly quiet, their eyes glued to tablets or smartphones. And her message was clear, that we were sedating the Canadian children just as much as she was sedating her own child, just in a different sort of way. So much for my defense of the Canadian parenting norms. Now, I tell that story not to pass criticism on those parents. I know it's very difficult to manage a sick child in a doctor's waiting room, but rather to illustrate a social experiment gone terribly wrong. So when these devices exploded into our lives a mere 10, 15 years ago, they were met with very understandable enthusiasm. These devices were like a miraculous thing, something that could instantly calm and placate a child no matter what, entertain them, calm them down. But over time, I think many of us have seen too many scenes like that doctor's waiting room, where children are so engrossed in their devices that they are completely cut off from the world around them. And many parents are starting to ask, what is it that we've lost? And more importantly, can we get it back? And I believe we can, and I hope to help answer those questions this evening. So what has occurred has been described as the great rewiring of childhood. Now, this is a phrase that was coined by Professor Jonathan Haidt of New York University, the author of The Anxious Generation. He describes this as a clearly documented transformation in the way that children spend their time, and there are 2 parts to it. So first, kids in the early 2000s started spending more time watching TV, surfing the web, and gaming on desktop computers using a dial-up internet connection. Initially, this was a great thing. This greater connectivity really brought people together in a positive way. But then it rapidly accelerated after the 2010s with the introduction of smartphones, high-speed internet, social media, as well as forward-facing cameras on the smartphones that allowed young people to post selfies online. Kids began spending far more time on the internet simply because it was so easy to do so. The second part of this transformation was a well-intentioned but quite disastrous shift toward keeping kids safe and restricting their autonomy in the real world. So many parents became spooked by fear-mongering news stories, and they started to worry that if their children were ever left unattended out in the world, they would attract sexual predators. So kids had fewer playmates outdoors, and they had screens indoors, so it became a lot easier and a lot more fun for them to start spending more time in the house. So another way to think of this is a shift from what was previously a play-based childhood, where children did really fun things like this, or they spent their time doing things like this. I love these old vintage photographs of childhood from the past. And they played on playgrounds like this. I mean, this is a little extreme. I'm not calling for a return to playgrounds like this. To what people now are describing as a phone-based childhood. It's more common to see children sitting outside looking at their devices and playing on playgrounds like this. So another way to think of this is kids are being raised today in a manner that does not resemble our childhoods at all, and this is not a good thing. Free, imaginative, unsupervised play with other kids of mixed ages is crucial for child development. In fact, the small-scale challenges that happen in that style of play are described as an inoculation that prepares children for the larger challenges ahead. And without it, many kids are left feeling woefully unprepared for adulthood and racked by anxiety. Now, one thing I'd like to say just up front is I am not anti-tech. You might be worried I'm some sort of tech-hating Luddite, but I assure you I'm not. I really do appreciate modern technology, and I believe that there is a time and place for it. It has enabled my entire career, and I wouldn't want to go back to a world where it doesn't exist. But we have to put technology in its rightful place, where it is a powerful tool, it's not a toy, and we have to teach children how to treat it with great respect. It should not be their primary source of entertainment. But the statistics suggest that it is. So for tweens between the ages of 8 and 12 years of age, they are spending on average 5.5 hours a day on their devices. And for teens ages 13 to 18, they are spending on average 8 hours and 40 minutes a day on devices, 5 hours of which are devoted to social media alone. Now, I would like to draw your attention to the word entertainment. This is screen time that is being used for pleasurable purposes only. It does not include screen time used for school, for homework, or for any necessary form of communication. This means that scrolling is the thing that teens are doing more than any other thing in their lives. It's more time than they are working a part-time job, it could be more time than they're spending in school, and it could even be more time than they are sleeping within a 24-hour period. 53% of teenagers say they would rather lose their sense of smell than their phone. They say that their phones are more important to them than vacationing abroad or meeting up with friends. And shockingly, 64% of teenagers today would rather give up their voting rights than suspend their social media use. Teenagers are getting typically around 237 notifications a day, although that same study found that on the uppermost end, some kids are getting 5,000 notifications in a 24-hour period. I don't even know how that's possible. It's pretty much impossible to do anything else if you're fielding that many thousands of notifications. Now, adults, unfortunately, are not that much better. We pick up our phones 144 times a day on average for a total of just over 4 hours a day, 2.5 of which are spent on social media. So I do like to take a look at this math, which is very basic common sense math, but I think it feels more impactful when you see it laid out in this way. 1 hour of screen time a day adds up to 15 days a year. 2 hours of screen time a day is 30 days out of every year. All the way up to 5 hours a day is 76 days per year. Now, I'm not saying that every single hour of your day needs to be allocated to something productive. Of course, we just need time off to veg and chill out a bit. But, you know, if we just reduce that time by even a half, if we cut back on it a little bit and directed it towards something a little bit more productive, it might, or meaningful, or pleasurable, it could add value to our lives. Because ultimately, the way that we spend our days is the way that we end up spending our entire lives. And we have to ask ourselves, is this truly how we want to spend our time? So what are the problems associated with so much screen time? I can think of screen time harms as being in two categories. We have the primary harms and then we have the secondary harms. So primary harms are a lot easier to quantify. These are the direct harms, the physical implications of excessive screen time. So we have physical implications. These include increased weight gain, sedentariness, impaired sleep quality, myopia epidemic, kids reporting higher levels of short-sightedness than ever before, impaired development of fine and gross motor skills. I find this one quite interesting. When I was writing my book, I interviewed a pediatric occupational therapist who said that she and many of her colleagues are seeing failure of development in many parts of the body that were previously considered to be very rare, but are now common. So these are young kids who can't do basic things like balance on one foot. They can't do a somersault. They can't hang from monkey bars. They fall over randomly, fall out of their chairs, struggle to manipulate little objects like a pencil with their fingers. And they attribute this to a lack of outdoor free play, which is the way that kids throughout all of history until very recently developed and learned to use their bodies in these healthy sorts of ways. Emotionally, we see that kids who spend too much time on devices from a young age are less empathetic. They tend to be more emotionally numb, less inclined to feel curiosity. They have reduced creativity, poor academic performance due to chronic distraction, and many are very lonely. They've also been exposed to overly mature content that is simply not suitable for young children. And there's a lot of normalization of highly sexualized, graphic, violent content. Neurologically, some very interesting studies coming out showing the brain rewiring, impairing children's ability to focus on bigger chunks of info, always needing steadily more gamification and stimulation in order to hold their attention. So I find that quite alarming. And then socially, it's almost ironic because these devices are often touted as social connectors, and yet the more time kids spend on them, the lonelier they get. There's a lot of cyberbullying. There's a lot of online cruelty. It causes problems with self-esteem, with self-image. There are fewer in-person interactions and face-to-face conversations in families where kids are spending a lot of time on their devices. Again, exposure to damaging content and a general sense of disconnection from people who genuinely care for them. And then we've got the secondary harms, which I think might almost be more alarming than the primary harms, because you can think of these as the opportunity cost. It is everything that kids are missing out on because they are on the devices. It's harder to quantify, it's harder to pin it down and to measure, but it is the life that is passing these kids by. So relationships are degraded, kids have less creativity, less curiosity, less opportunity for artistic pursuits, and discovering new hobbies and interests and skills that they might have otherwise. There are fewer conversations, especially ones that go more in depth, and reduced time for play, the sort of imaginative, active, outdoor play with kids of mixed ages that they really need. And just a general sense that time is slipping by. We've all felt that feeling before when we've picked up our phone with the intention of doing 1 or 2 tasks, and then 30 minutes goes by, maybe an hour goes by, and we look up and we wonder, where did that time go? And it's never coming back. So how do kids spend their time online? What are they doing with all of these hours? Kids do not use their screen time constructively, much as we might like to believe otherwise. So these are generalizations, but boys tend to gravitate to YouTube, Reddit, online multiplayer video games, and porn. That is because these websites offer boys the agency-building activities that they crave in the real world. So things like exploring, competing, playing at war, and mastering skills. The only problem is that if it takes place online, boys end up feeling increasingly isolated and lacking practical skills. Girls, on the other hand, gravitate to social media platforms such as Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, and others. This is because girls are deeply affected by visual comparison. They always have been. And their aggression tends to be more relational, which these platforms make very easy, to be mean in particular. Girls are more prone to sharing emotions than boys are, which these platforms reward with views, likes, and comments. In fact, the more emotional you are on social media platforms, the more attention you get. Social media has been said to cause the most harm to girls between the ages of 11 and 13, and to boys between the ages of 14 and 15, which ironically is precisely when most kids start using it. These ages have been described as distinct windows of developmental sensitivity, when higher estimated social media use predicts a decrease in life satisfaction ratings a year later, and vice versa. Lower estimated social media use predicts an increase in life satisfaction ratings a year later. So in other words, the less time you spend on social media, the happier you will become. One study found that girls who are heavy users of social media are 3 times more likely to be depressed than non-users, and boys are twice as likely. Across dozens of studies, teens who are heavy users of screen-based media, so this could be social media, video games, general internet surfing, online videos, etc., are anywhere from 30 to 200% more likely to be depressed or unhappy than peers who spend less time. Now, the good news is that this can be turned around quite easily. There was a very excellent study of Danish families done recently that found that after 2 weeks of minimal access to screens, kids and teens were less angry and depressed compared to a control group that did not change their screen time habits. The situation with social media is so serious that in 2024, the former Surgeon General of the United States issued an official advisory warning parents against it, saying we do not have adequate evidence to determine whether or not it is safe for our children to use. He wrote an editorial for the New York Times and said, "Why have we failed to respond to the harms of social media when they are no less urgent or widespread than those posed by unsafe cars, planes, or food?" The fact is, social media is highly unregulated, and it is not likely to become regulated anytime soon, which means that it is up to us parents to protect our own kids. That job falls to us, whether or not we want it. Filters make things worse on social media. It's tough because social media depicts a highly curated and often falsified version of reality. I like to show this slide because it shows how easy it is for a face that's puffy and crying to suddenly slap a filter on and look like some kind of supermodel. Being a teenager is already tough, but girls nowadays face almost impossibly high beauty standards among their very own peers, who are using filters to transform their faces from ordinary to this hypersexualized, homogenized standard of beauty that, again, is not even real. Even more troubling, there has been a surge in injectables and plastic surgeries to create this so-called Instagram face in real life. Now, I am also a realist. I understand that we live in a digital world, and this is where much of our communication occurs. I don't have a problem with that. But problems arise when that is where the majority of a child's interactions are taking place. When that is where a child's social life exists, exclusively online, that child is going to run into some problems. And there's reasons for this. Virtual interactions are inferior to in-person interactions for a few reasons. Number one, they are asynchronous. So communication happens out of sync. You can send a message, and then you may have to wait minutes, hours, or worse, even days before you get a response. Virtual interactions are disembodied, which means that you miss out on the facial cues and the body language that goes along with normal human communication. Virtual interactions often happen within large groups, which means that communication becomes performative. You are proclaiming opinions to the world, you are exposing yourself to public backlash, instead of sharing thoughts with people who genuinely care about you. And finally, online communications have a low bar for entry and exit, meaning that there's a lack of incentive to treat others with respect and to repair any kind of misunderstandings. When you are in the internet, it is very easy to ghost someone, to rage quit, to just delete a profile. You cannot do that as easily in real life, where you have to confront the people that you've offended and actually talk through your problems. This environment has proven to be devastating for Gen Z. Rates of anxiety and depression have surged in the years since smartphones arrived, and it's not because of pandemics, climate change, school shootings, financial crises, political polarization, or wars, although those factors certainly do not make things any better. The timing just doesn't align, nor does it explain why preteen girls are suffering more than any other demographic, or why these trends hold across the entire Anglosphere. Rather, the evidence does point to something very big and very serious happening in young people's lives, starting in the early 2010s, which is precisely when smartphones and social media arrived. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, 40% of American high school students in 2023 reported feeling sad and hopeless. up from 28% in 2011. Between 2010 and 2020, the suicide rate for young teens went up 167% among girls and 91% among boys. Prior, it had stayed within the same limited range since the 1980s. Self-harm rates among teens have surged. By 2022, there was a 500% increase in incidents of self-inflicted poisoning, cutting, strangling, and suffocation over the previous 9 years. Hospital admissions for eating disorders have gone up 6-fold in a decade, with the contagious influence of social media cited as a factor. TikTok is generally considered to be the worst of the social media platforms. TikTok started recommending content tied to eating disorders and self-harm to 13-year-olds within 30 minutes of them signing up for the platform. And if these new users were identified as being vulnerable with keywords such as lose weight in their profile, they were served even far worse content, 12 times more videos on self-harm and suicide than the standard accounts. There was an experiment conducted by journalists at the Wall Street Journal. They created fake TikTok accounts for 13-year-olds as well, and were immediately shown videos about drug use and paid pornography sites. When they reached out to TikTok for comment, a rep told the Journal that the platform does not filter content for kids. They see all the same stuff as the adults do. This is a picture of Kristen Bride, whose son Carson killed himself at 16 after being bullied on Snapchat. She wrote an essay for After Babel saying that he received nearly 100 harassing, threatening, and sexually explicit messages in the weeks leading up to his death. These came from his high school Snapchat friends who had used anonymous apps to hide their identities. Now, this is, of course, an example of an extreme outcome that likely will not affect most families, but it is the tip of the iceberg, with many other kids experiencing less extreme but still very concerning outcomes following excessive screen time use. Furthermore, it's important to note that Snapchat in recent years has received more than 10,000 reports of sextortion per month, which their internal analysis says is probably only a very tiny fraction of the actual abuse. Instagram is not that much better. Half of young adults say that they have seen at least one self-harm post on Instagram, and a shocking 1 out of 3 has copied that behavior and harmed themselves in the same way. You could say that there's a contagious effect, that extreme behaviors that a teen or a preteen may not have thought to try become something that they are curious about and decide to try because they have witnessed it on Instagram. 1 in 5 girls between 13 and 15 has been sexually propositioned on social media, and 37% exposed to unwanted nudity. The majority of teen girls on Instagram and Snapchat have been contacted by a stranger who made them feel uncomfortable. And then, lastly, there is porn. 94% of kids have watched porn by the age of 14. Most boys start seeing it around age 10 or 11. The UK Children's Commissioner published a very disturbing report in 2023 that says almost half, so 47% of young people between the ages of 16 and 21, believe that girls expect sex to involve physical aggression. She also wrote, "I will never forget the girl who told me about her first kiss with her boyfriend, age 12, who strangled her. He had seen it in pornography and he thought that was how you do it." So think about that. By giving our kids phones, which are portals to porn, whether we like it or not, we are essentially training them to be violent towards women, and we are telling young women that that is what they should expect. At this point, I just want to pause for 1 minute. I'm going to play a very short video that was released 2 weeks ago by Smartphone Free Childhood US called Let's Change the Norm. And I think it does a very good job of wrapping up many of these points that I've just made. So let's take a listen here.
Hey kiddo, it's about time for bed, okay?
Okay.
Well, remember, there's a box in the corner over there with all the pornographic material that's ever been made in the world, even the really weird stuff that could scar you for life. I'm trusting you not to look in there, okay?
Okay.
Feelings are for losers.
Oh, and this guy's gonna be in your corner all night, just randomly spewing out hateful things. Just ignore him, okay? while I'm thinking of it, there's an order form on your desk where you can purchase illegal drugs. The mean girls from your school are going to be standing there talking about you all night. And this Russian hacker is going to keep asking for your password.
I'm not hacker. Amazon customer service.
Just needs you to ignore him, okay? Love you, buddy.
We ask too much of our kids when we give them a smartphone. Let's change the norm. Together.
Maybe we go around the room and share social security numbers.
Join the movement at smartphonefreechildhoodus.com.
Yeah. I'll get it anyway.
All right, so trying to inject a wee bit of humor into an otherwise very dark topic. But the takeaway here is very important for us to remember, and this is Jonathan Haidt's phrase from the Anxious Generation book that has resonated with millions of parents, that kids are overprotected in the real world and they are underprotected online, and it is time for us to turn that around. The kids want our help too. Many understand that there's a serious problem. Many feel that they are missing out. They themselves are incapable of drawing those boundaries, and they rely on the adults in their lives to do that. This is one of the more moving quotes I have ever read. It's from Reddit. A 15-year-old boy posted that he has no hobbies, interests, goals, or ambitions. He said, I want to do all sorts of things, but I never do. My screen time is nearly 11 hours a day, and I just feel like crying myself to sleep. How do I stop this crippling addiction that I have with my phone? I don't know where his parents are. This is a child who is in desperate need of some adult guidance to step in and create those boundaries that he needs. And while your child might not be as far gone as this poor boy or suffering to that extent, I think that there's always room for improvement. And so that's what we are going to talk about next. What can we do? I recognize that this is a deeply complex problem, but I think of it as having various layers. So there are the high-level changes that we desperately need. We need the legislative changes, the tighter laws that will protect our children. We need the tech companies to be held accountable, whether it's through lawsuits, whether it's through legislation, to change the design of their platforms and their devices to be less addictive. They could easily do this. They're just not incentivized to do it at this point. We do need school systems to implement more meaningful phone bans and healthier tech policies. And all of these things are important. We should be advocating for all of them, but these things take a very long time. They are slow moving. They move at a glacial pace, if we're being completely honest. And if there's one thing that we know as parents, the years are going by very quickly with our children at home, and we can't afford to wait for all of these laws to come into place to protect them. And so really, it's up to us right now to make a difference in their lives. We as parents are the gatekeepers. We are the first line of defense. We are the people through whom this technology has to pass in order to access our children. And so I think we need to really take this role seriously and understand that there is a lot that we can do as parents. This is good news. I don't want it to feel overly daunting. I want it to feel empowering. And so tonight I've put together a number of guidelines for how you as a parent can handle technology in the home. This is far from comprehensive. There are many other things that you could do as well, and you may not even want to do all of them. But even if you introduce one or two of them into your home life, it will make things easier. So we will talk about each one of them individually, but right now I'll just read through the list. Number 1, you can say no. Number 2, no smartphone before 16. Number 3, keep phone-free zones. Number 4, be choosy. Number 5, allow real-world independence. Number 6, do not send phones to school. And number 7, put down your own phone. So we'll start with number 1. This is a tough one for parents. I think that in our society, there is a reluctance often in my generation of parents to exercise authority in relation to our children, and yet that is what the kids need in this particular situation. You have to recognize that you are in charge, and it is okay to say no to your kid. I can't tell you how many parents come up to me after talks and say, thank you for giving me permission to say no to my child. And so if you are struggling with that, I'm telling you right now, it is okay to do that. In fact, that might be exactly what your child needs. You also have new information, and I think this is an important point to let sink in, that if you introduced a smartphone or allowed your child to get social media several years ago, you may not have had information that you have now. The information's piling up. The new studies are coming out all the time, building the case against giving kids this technology from a young age and showing that it is important to delay as long as we possibly can. So you can say that you are now armed with fresh information. You're better informed than you were before in the past. And it is okay to change your mind. Changing your mind is not a bad thing. It means that you're growing, you're learning, you're maturing as a parent, you're gaining perspective, and try to think of it as a bold, a courageous, a brave step. If you never change your mind, I think that it is a sign of stagnation. So keep in mind, you're setting an example for your child. Dr. Becky Kennedy is a family therapist who really encourages parents to reevaluate the rules surrounding tech. And this is a great quote that I wanted to share with you. Think of yourself as a pilot who always has the right to return to base should the skies become more turbulent than expected. In fact, this is something the passengers would want the pilot to do, even if they seem annoyed in the moment. You are the pilot of your family plane. And it could be exactly what your child needs. Scott Galloway is an author and a podcaster who has a slightly more humorous take on it. My job as their dad is to be their prefrontal cortex until it shows up. Now, Scott Galloway has 2 teenage sons. I have some sons too. Still sort of wondering when those prefrontal cortexes will show up, so I can relate. Guideline number 2, no smartphone before 16. So this is a bit more of a higher age limit than the one laid out in The Anxious Generation, but this recommendation comes from Dr. Jean Twenge, social psychologist at San Diego State University and the author of many books on this topic, Generations, iGen. And she says that giving a child a smartphone should be on par with getting a driver's license in terms of the level of maturity that's required to operate one. I find this absolutely fascinating. As she has explained, you can do a tremendous amount of harm to yourself and to other people inadvertently in a car, and you can do the same thing with a phone. She said you would not put a 14-year-old behind the wheel of a car. In most states, it's at least 16, if not 17. Some places in the world, it's 18. And that's why she recommends waiting. She also says you don't really need a smartphone before the age of 16. And once you have a driver's license, that's when having navigation apps and maybe occasional internet access is a bit more crucial. When you do give your child a phone, ideally at the age of 16, it should not be a free-for-all. You absolutely need to have a contract. I think that the parent should own the phone, should pay for the phone, and retain control over that phone and make it very clear to the child that they can take away the phone at the slightest violation of the contract. So make that very clear. Always have the password yourself and do periodic spot checks on the device without having to warn your child in advance. So figure out what works for you, but definitely having clear expectations for use and consequences laid out clearly on this contract that everyone has signed is a good way to start off with handling those devices. Jean also goes on to say no social media before 16. That aligns with Jonathan Haidt's recommendations as well in The Anxious Generation, although she would like to see even 18. Many experts say 18. That social media is simply not a place for children. And if the Surgeon General is saying that there's not adequate evidence to determine its safety for our children to use, it's probably best for them just not to be on it in the first place. I've talked to a number of families about their workarounds. There are some families with older teens who decide to let their kids have social media, but for example, they will only let them access it from a desktop computer. So that way the child still has a profile and still sort of is aware of what's going on in that world, but there's a bit of friction that's been introduced because when they want to check it, they can't just whip a device out of their pocket and look at it. They have to wait until they're actually sitting down in front of a computer to catch up on what's happening. So that could be one way of making it a little bit less convenient. But realize that it is okay to change your mind, to deactivate profiles, to delete profiles, to sort of think of hitting pause and telling your kid, this just isn't working anymore. I made a mistake by introducing this when I did, and we're going to reevaluate. So Dr. Becky Kennedy, again, is a big proponent of this. She says you can tell your child, social media is not an option right now. I know that's not what you want to hear. I know this makes your life harder in some ways, and I know we will get through it. Or you can say, I've learned some new things about a specific app or behavior, and I will change the phone rules. I know this is frustrating, and I know it's important for your safety. I get that this feels annoying to you, and it will take some time to get used to. There's a really interesting organization called abstinence.org right now that is advocating for young people to step away from social media completely. They're trying to change the norm around the presence of social media in young people's lives. So if you're looking for some support in this area, I highly recommend checking out this organization. And again, it's interesting because there's a disconnect between actions and feelings. This is some fascinating data where 1,000 American teens were asked how they really feel about social media. And almost half say they wish social media didn't exist. So keep in mind, teens are on it on average 5 hours a day, but this study showed that 43% would undo Snapchat and 47% would delete TikTok from the face of the earth if they could. And yet they feel trapped because that is where all of their friends are, and they feel that if they are not on these platforms, they would be disconnected from everything else that's going on. That's something that we need to fight back against. Guideline number 3, keep phone-free zones. So the top 3 places where you should never have phones are, number 1, in a child's bedroom. Dr. Jean Twenge and her research says if there is one single thing you do to improve the dynamic in your home when it comes to devices, keep the phones out of the bedroom. This is where kids should go to sleep. Also, they will make poorer decisions in the middle of the night. They will be tempted to look at their devices. And many kids do. On average, teens are getting around 12 notifications at night between midnight and 5 a.m. And so if their phone is next to their bed, they're going to be highly tempted to check it. So it's best just to keep it out of the room completely. The same goes for video game consoles. If you let your child play video games, the console should never be kept in their bedroom. It should be kept in a common area of the home where you can monitor what they're playing, how long they're playing, and it also becomes then more of a communal activity. It's more welcoming for other people to join in. It's less isolating than if they're alone in their room. Mealtime is another great time to make a hard no phone rule. We all live very busy lives. It can be hard to come together and share food, but when we do have that opportunity, we should be focused on our children, on the other members of the family that are there. It's an opportunity to check in on your kids and see how they're really going or really doing and work on some dinner etiquette and conversation skills, all of these valuable things that kids have to practice repeatedly in order to become better at it. And then cars should be dedicated to conversation. This is counterintuitive advice as many parents tend to give their child screens once they get into the car. But there's a few reasons why I think this makes a lot of sense. One is that if a child grows up looking out the window of the car, they will be more geographically oriented in the world. They will be better drivers. I've heard this from a few parents who think that their kids are better drivers because they don't need GPS to get from point A to point B all the time. They're just more self-aware in that sense. And then also, there's something about a car that I think is conducive to deeper conversations with your kid, especially if you are driving at night, in the dark, you're both looking ahead, you don't have to make eye contact. Teenagers tend not to open up a lot, not that easily in general, but in the car, there's a tendency for them to be more likely to have those sorts of conversations. And that's something that I've heard from many other parents. There's some interesting research that shows that it takes 7 minutes for a conversation to go deep. In that first 7 minutes, you can cover all the superficial material, like how are you doing? What was the score of the game? What's for dinner? But then after the 7-minute mark, it sort of slows down and someone has to take a risk. They have to ask a provocative question. They have to go to that territory that's just a bit deeper. And the problem with the proliferation of our phones is that we never have the chance to push past that 7-minute mark. There's always some place to escape to. So if you keep phones out of the car, you might have better conversations with your kids. Number 4, be choosy. So again, I'm not anti-tech. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have any of these devices in our lives, but I think we should be highly selective about the technology that we introduce into our lives. So don't embrace things just because they're new and exciting and shiny and everyone's doing it. By all means, ask what you can gain by adopting this new device, but also ask what you might lose in the process. It might not be worth the trade-off. I really like this concept from Cal Newport, author of Digital Minimalism. He says we should strive to be techno-selectionists. So this is someone who carefully chooses which technologies to adopt and to integrate into their lives, but isn't afraid to reject certain ones when they fail to add value. So in effect, taking back control of our attention and our time. We can coexist with these technologies, but we need to be the ones who are in control. Another way to think of it is to ask yourself, does it amplify or does it amputate my experience of life? We need to ask ourselves these big questions like, what do I value? How do I want to spend my time? How do I want my children to spend their time? This kind of introspection can feel deeply uncomfortable. It is easier to blame the tech companies for designing something that's super addictive and wait for them to fix it, which they absolutely should do, but it's not that simple. We do have a responsibility to ourselves and to our children to do this sort of self-examination. Now, there are better forms of screen time than others. So this will come as good news to many parents. An example of better screen time, you could say good screen time, I suppose, is story time. So something that tells a long story about people in a world with moral values watched on a big screen with another person. So in another word, you could say a movie. A high-quality movie night that you watch with your kids can be a very positive experience. Watching on a big screen is a lot better for a child than watching on a small screen. It has to do with the level of neurological stimulation that occurs when the device is held right close to their face as opposed to being on a wall in the distance. And if it's, again, watched on a big screen in a common area, it's more likely for other people to join them, and then it becomes a communal activity rather than an isolating one. Bad screen time is fragmented time. Watched on a touchscreen device, alone, watching short, amoral videos that have no character development, and jumping around as soon as it gets boring. So, in other words, watching YouTube videos that are on autoplay or shorts, or Instagram Reels, things that are just playing automatically. It can be very difficult, too, for a child's brain to comprehend when the time is up. And if you take away their device after they've been watching short videos or reels, they're more likely to have a tantrum. Whereas if you give them a movie, it has a narrative arc, it has a natural ending, and it can be quite easy for even a young child's brain to comprehend that the end has come. It's time to put it away. It's time to move on to the next thing. Interestingly, passive screen time tends to be better for a child than interactive screen time. And again, this is counterintuitive. Often we think that the more interaction there is with the device, it's better for their brain, it's more stimulating, it's more educational. That's not the case. It's actually a lot worse for them. It also has an impact on their sleep. So there was one study of over 2,000 children that looked at the difference between iPads and television on children's sleep. And the researchers found that it took only 30 minutes of iPad time to disrupt a child's sleep quality, whereas it took 2 hours of passive screen time, of watching TV, to have the same level of impact. So 30 minutes of iPad time was about equivalent to 2 hours of TV. So I'm not telling you to go out there and just have your kids watch TV all day long, but I am saying that given the option between the two, maybe opt for the movie over the iPad time once in a while. And finally, keep it simple. So always choose the most basic form of whatever technology is required to accomplish a task. If you need to communicate with your child throughout their commute to school, let's say, you can do that, but you need to give them perhaps a basic phone or a flip phone or some simpler form of technology, not the most powerful supercomputer that we have that fits in our pockets right now. That just has too much on it. That is too much responsibility for a child, too much risk. It's a portal to all that might be bad out there in the world. Guideline number 5, allow real-world independence. So I think of this as the flip side of, taking away the devices. You have to then let the children go in the world, give them the skills to be able to move more independently. They need to be able to play more freely, but you also need to give them more responsibility. You need to give them chores. You need to help them become more independent and thus better prepared for adulthood. So I mentioned the benefits of play. Play is very much rehearsal for adulthood. It's an opportunity for children to practice skills like talking to other people, negotiating, setting up rules, dealing with the kids who break the rules or cheat. These are low-stakes environments where children can practice these things before they are in the workplace, where they will then take the lessons that they learned as children and apply them. So it's best to learn them during play. Play is a chance to develop new relationships and friendships, and of course to develop those fine and gross motor skills that I mentioned before. When you take away the devices to encourage real-world play, there is something known as the replacement phase. So this is a rough period. I'm not telling you it's going to be easy. It can be very hard to pull back the digital entertainment and swap it out for analog, physical, real-world toys. But it is important, and it's absolutely possible. Some researchers say it takes a minimum of 4 weeks for a child's emotional baseline to settle, and that you should not diagnose a child with any sort of learning disability or anything like that until they have been completely screen-free for a minimum of 4 weeks. So I think that that's some very interesting research. So brace yourselves. If you are going to go down this road, which I highly recommend, it will take a while for them. Independent play is a muscle that has to be developed, it has to be trained. It might take a lot more effort up front on your part as a parent to get the things that they need, the toys they need, the stimulation that they need, to make an effort to take them out for bike rides, for walks, to invite friends over to play with them. But over time it will become easier and your child will start to be able to entertain themselves on their own. So you will need to collect real physical loose part toys, materials, sporting gear, books, craft supplies, all sorts of things. Kids are very embodied creatures. They need things to do with their time. And if you take away the devices, you have to fill it with something else. Along with this comes greater noise, greater mess, greater chaos. And this can feel a bit stressful to households that are used to kids sitting quietly and passively on iPads. But I think that it's wonderful, and we do need to welcome it. I mean, I struggle with this at times. I have 3 boys, and when they start wrestling, the entire house can shake. And there are times where I feel like tearing out my hair. But then I tell myself that there will come a time before long when I think back and I will wish and long for that noise in my home again, because it's only going to be there for a few more years. And then you can make your yard inviting if you have an outdoor space. I have invested in a number of things to make my backyard more appealing to the kids. We have a secondhand trampoline, we have a slack line, a basketball net in the driveway. I designated one area of the yard to be a mud pit where they can put the hose in and make as much mud as they want and get covered from head to toe, so that they weren't digging up the main part of the lawn, which happened on a few occasions. But all of this makes them want to go outside. So we need to try to see our spaces through a child's eyes. What will make them want to play, to get off of these devices and have more fun? Boredom is a very good thing too. I think in our society we have a tendency to feel that we need to constantly stimulate and entertain our children, but we don't. When we subtract ourselves from the child's space, the children are marvelously adept at finding things to do. And boredom is a deeply uncomfortable phase for a child. They don't like being bored, and so they will find ways to get beyond it. And that is where they will discover new hobbies, new skills, new interests, and learn how to do all sorts of very interesting things. The Torrance tests of creative thinking are conducted every year to assess how creatively children can solve problems and generate new ideas. And what's very interesting is in recent years, these test scores have been declining rapidly. And researchers suspect that it might be due to kids' increased use of screens. So essentially in their downtime, they're wasting their brain power looking at devices and playing games and watching shows instead of applying their brain power to creative problem solving and new solutions. So that is another reason why boredom is a good thing and you shouldn't be afraid of it. Now, play can even move into the territory of risky play, which are sort of physically thrilling forms of play that could possibly lead to injury. Now, this was a phrase that was released, a statement issued by the Canadian Pediatric Society just last year that I thought was very refreshing. They said to parents, please try to keep your children as safe as necessary, not as safe as possible. So this might require a bit of a mental shift for us because the tendency is to want to bubble wrap, to make sure that nothing bad ever happens to them, and yet those are the growth opportunities. We also live in a time of misplaced fears, so I get why parents are scared of the world. I have to fight those fears too. As a parent, we're hardwired to want to protect our children from everything that could happen to them, and yet the world is safer than it has ever been. There's a really interesting statistic that if for some particular crazy reason you wanted your child to get kidnapped by a stranger, you would have to leave them outside in public for 750,000 years in order for it to be statistically likely that they'd get snatched by a stranger. So in other words, it's really not going to happen. Now, if you're worried about the prospect of your child moving through the world without a smartphone in hand, in the name of safety, I'll tell you one little anecdote that might change your perspective on it. I had a conversation with a mother in Vancouver a few years ago who has 2 teenage daughters who ride public transit every day. They don't have smartphones. And they tell their mother that they are hyper alert to the presence of creepy strangers around them, and that they always move away as soon as someone approaches them. What they're worried about, however, are all the other kids that they see who have their AirPods in and their eyeballs down, glued to their screens, watching TikTok reels, and they are completely oblivious to the presence of the creepy strangers who are approaching them or who are standing too close. And the question there is, who is the safer child? Is it the child who could hypothetically call their parent from their smartphone after something bad has happened? Or is it the child who is relying on their ancient neural circuitry to detect and avoid that danger and make sure that it never even happens in the first place? And I don't know about you, but I feel a lot more comfortable knowing that my kids can navigate the real world without relying on a device that could get broken, that could get stolen, it could run out of charge. I do think our kids are safer when they are present in the world and able to move through it confidently on their own. And I do think it's important to spend time building practical life skills. So one of my most popular articles in the Globe and Mail was a few months ago, 11 life skills that your 18-year-old should have mastered by now. So some of these were taken from a fantastic book called How to Raise an Adult by Julie Lythcott-Haims, former dean of freshmen at Stanford. And she was so alarmed by the lack of practical skills from incoming students that she wrote this book on how we can raise kids who are just better at being adults in the world today. And I added to her list. Her book came out over 10 years ago, and I think times have changed somewhat. But I agree with many of them. An 18-year-old should be able to talk to strangers. Talking to strangers is not a bad thing. Going off with strangers is a bad thing. So I think it's important to teach the difference to your kids. And if your kids are out in the world, they should know how to approach a stranger to ask for help if they need it, how to recognize when a stranger looks nice and is well-meaning, and when one is giving off bad vibes. You can train that in a child, and it is important. 18-year-olds should be able to navigate new locations, manage time on their own, cope with adversity, handle conflict, remain focused, help run a household, care for themselves, earn and manage money, take risks, and sit alone with their thoughts. And the important thing to realize is that kids don't wake up at 18 knowing magically how to do these things. Training is cumulative. It takes many, many years. And if you think about the fact that teenagers are spending on average 8 hours and 40 minutes a day on their phones for fun, that represents a whole lot of time not spent learning how to function optimally in the world. So again, if we could just use some of that time to develop these skills, I think our kids will feel a lot better prepared for adulthood when they eventually leave home. Guideline number 6, do not send phones to school. This one might be a bit controversial. The general advice these days is to advocate for bell-to-bell phone bans, which I fully support. I do think that students should be physically separated from their devices from the start of the school day till the end. A lot of those studies show that that leads to better academic outcomes and better social dynamics in the school. But again, that's a change that can take time. And I would challenge parents to consider, what can you do right now? And I think one of the most effective things you could do is tell your kid, the phone doesn't go to school. The phone stays home. We wouldn't let our kids take a TV to school and set it up on their desks and watch their favorite show at the back of the classroom, and yet we seem to turn a blind eye when it comes to these devices. So again, maybe you do need to communicate with your kid during the commute or the after-school hours if they're doing extracurricular activities. But again, is there a simpler form of technology that you can use that's not going to undermine their ability to perform academically? Because the research is real. It's really interesting. There was one fascinating study called the brain drain study that looked at the effects of the presence of phones on kids' cognitive capacity. So these students were divided into 3 groups. The first group had their phone on silent, face down on their desk beside them. The second group had their phone in silent in their backpack at their feet. And the third group had their phone in their locker down the hall, completely out of sight and far away from where they were. And all 3 groups had to perform the same cognitive test. The first group did the most poorly. They were the ones with the visual distraction of their phone. Interestingly, the second group did just as poorly as the first group. And the researchers believe that this was because the physical proximity of the phone, even though it was at their feet in their bag, was still so distracting that it reduced their ability to think. The researchers said, this means our brains are automatically drawn to our phones, so that in order to accomplish another task, we have to expend mental effort in order to resist checking them. I think many of us adults can relate to that feeling ourselves, and it's even stronger for a child. I think, too, there's other things that schools can do, that we should extend this conversation beyond just the phone bans. I would love to see administrators issue a statement of support at the start of the year, periodically throughout the year, saying, we support any efforts by parents, by our families, to delay smartphone ownership and access to social media platforms. I think it would go a long way to making it aspirational instead of making it weird. Because right now it's hard to be one of those families that's doing things differently, that's trying to hold out and kind of go against the status quo. Another thing I would really love to see is no social media for any sort of vital communications that are occurring within school-sanctioned clubs. So if you're on a sports team or any kind of extracurricular club or a band, I do not think that those groups should be allowed to use social media platforms to convey their information to their students, because that puts tremendous amount of pressure on families to let their kids start using social media potentially earlier than they would have liked. I've experienced this personally. My one son plays football, and the football group has a Snapchat group. He cannot participate in the Snapchat group, which is quite frustrating to him. That's just not an option. He's not getting it. Fortunately, there is a WhatsApp group, so he can be part of the WhatsApp group, but as he's explained to me, there's different information coming through the different channels. The Snapchat group is just the coaches sending them information and no one can respond. They have all the responses shut off, whereas the Snapchat group is where all of the fun, dynamic stuff is going on, and again, he can't be part of that. I would love if the school just changed the policy on that completely. And finally, I would say no QR codes in class. So we had an incident where in my son's 9th grade class, a visiting speaker came and put a survey up on the smart board and asked all the kids to scan it, and my son was the only kid who couldn't do it. And in a sense, he was sort of outed that day. He had hidden the fact that he didn't have a smartphone from his friends. Up until that point, it wasn't something that he was announcing to the world. But the only reason I found out about this was because his teacher called that night to apologize for all of the teasing that ensued. So that's something to consider. If you are a teacher, just be very careful about, using things like a QR code that encourages kids to bring their personal technology into the class. And I don't really buy this concept of meeting students where they are at. I mean, we have a historic precedent for it not working. Schools offered designated smoking courts for their students back in the 1970s and 80s. Apparently, they even offered trays of cigarette samplers in the cafeteria, only to realize that smoking is indeed quite bad for your health and should not be enabled by taxpayer dollars. So schools changed their tune and shut down the smoking courts, and nobody really talks about it anymore. I don't really buy the argument either that kids need to be taught tech skills from a young age in order to succeed in a digital world. And there's a few reasons for that, one of which is that kids are already proficient users. They're not growing up under rocks. They know what they're doing. The tech is evolving so fast that it's not going to look anything like it does now by the time they enter the professional workforce. And it is designed to be intuitive. We learned it later in life. They will pick it up too. They already know far more than many of us did, or maybe even do right now. Final guideline, put down your own phone. So I'm talking about parental modeling here, and this is a crucial component, a slightly uncomfortable one perhaps at times. You are never not modeling as a parent. You're teaching more to your child by what you do than by what you say. And if kids grow up seeing their parent with a phone in their hand every single minute of the day, that's what they will aspire to. They will think that that is the pinnacle of adulthood, of independence, and they will want to be that way too. So spend some time thinking about how you use your device in the presence of your child. And again, I'm not saying don't use it. I just think that it's important to be conscious and aware of when you're on it. Most fundamentally, to give your child your full attention when you are with your child, when you are interacting with them. And then if you need your phone for work, do those tasks separately. Batch your tasks, if you will, and allocate certain amounts of time to doing your work, maybe in a different physical space. I try to keep my laptop out in my office, which is separate from the main part of my house. It doesn't always work, but it does create a bit of physical separation between the tendency to want to look and resisting the urge. Ask yourself too, do you have offline habits? Do you have offline hobbies? Do you go outside? Do you read books? Do you have face-to-face conversations with your friends? Do you get enough sleep? Do you leave your phone outside of your bedroom when you go to bed? You can also think about swapping out some of the digital tools on your device with some analog substitutes. So even doing sort of old-fashioned things like having a physical calendar on the wall, or using a cookbook to make dinner, or getting a real alarm clock. I did that recently, and it's actually quite wonderful. We have a landline in our home even, which has been quite revolutionary and a lot of fun, especially for my younger kids. You should try to establish regular breaks in your life. where you're off your devices, modeling digital detoxes for your kid, just showing them that you do not need that device in your life every minute of the day. The 4T rule might be helpful. No talking, texting, tapping on a phone or TV when others are present. And we should think about how we handle ourselves online, on social media platforms in particular, if we use them. So this lovely term came from a writer named Mary Harrington. She described it as digital modesty, a general disposition to avoid any form of online self-presentation that veers into spectacle. So Mary has Instagram, but she has a few strict rules for herself, and these include no selfies, no pictures of her husband or her kids, and no discussion of any interpersonal relationship without explicit consent from the other person. This is valuable advice. I think we parents are often quick to surrender details about our families to social media without thinking about the potential impact. And a few more ideas here quickly as we wrap up. I mentioned regular tech fasts, but this could look like, let's say, 1 hour a day at least, 1 day a week, and 1 week out of every year. You could try a lockbox. I've met many families that swear by these lockboxes. They're very effective, especially if they have timers to get the phone out of the way. You could use it for your teen who's working on a school assignment with a tight deadline. This could be helpful. Having a phone basket at the door. Again, something I've heard from different families is quite effective, where you ask people who enter your home to deposit their phones at the front door. It was likened to shoes, actually, in one analogy that I heard, where outdoor shoes are incredibly useful. No one wants to go out in the world without shoes, but then you come into a home and the correct thing is to take them off, to leave dirty street shoes at the door and then enter the home to do the things that you're going to do. Maybe we should start thinking of phones like that. Fantastic tools that we all carry and all want, but not something that come with us into every single space that we enter. You could consider sending your child to a phone-free summer camp. Many parents describe their children coming back completely transformed after several weeks of being disconnected. You could even get a pet. Again, maybe a provocative suggestion, but I speak from personal experience. I have to say the $25 hamster that we got has been one of the best investments I've ever made, has occupied endless hours of my youngest son's attention. Pretty low maintenance too. And if you're stumped for inspiration, think to the past. Most of us grew up in a pre-smartphone era. How did we spend our time? What did we do? Kids have not changed that much over the course of a single generation. It might take a little bit of time for them to accustom to a new way of being, but we survived, and so will they. Really what it comes down to is that we adults choose what is hard. I've heard it described that if you don't give your kid a device, you have one fight with them, but as soon as you give them the device, you have 1,000 fights. The fights are never ending, and your family life can just degrade and deteriorate into a constant battle over screen time. So you have to choose what you want to fight about. Even when I talk to my own friends, a number of them have experienced really awful things induced by screens in their children's lives, crippling anxiety from cyberbullying. I have one friend whose daughter tragically has attempted suicide 3 times as a result of cyberbullying. And I just think I would rather be fighting with my kid about why he can't have a smartphone than sitting next to a hospital bed wondering if my child is going to make it. And so really, we choose what is hard. Saying no to your child is not a bad thing. You can absolutely go against the status quo. If anything, you're not keeping them away, you're protecting them, and you're giving them the opportunity to have this childhood that they are entitled to. So many people say resistance is futile. I think that resistance is the most powerful tool we have, and it might just be the most generous and important gift we ever give our children. Thank you so much for listening this evening.